Good morning. My name is Josh Silver. I'm a co-founder of Rebrand Washington Football. We are a grassroots advocacy group asking the Washington football team to change its name. The name of the current team is a racial slur. This morning we're going to deliver petitions, but before we deliver petitions, we're going to make remarks, and towards the end of our remarks, we're going to have some Native American singing and celebration. But before we get started, I want Joe Gaines, who's Choctaw, to lead us in some prayer.
If everybody would you just pass that sage around real quick? And we can sage off. What sage is, it purifies us. Quickly, it just pushes away the bad spirits. Good spirits like to be with this Creator, likes that smell as well. What I want to remind us too about is how we came to be here. This issue's been going on for Columbus. Imagine your child, your kid, goes to school. Somebody says, "Ha ha, you're just a Redskin. I saw you. Your team lost. That's all you are." And imagine that, equating that to bullying, because it's a continuous process. It's been going on. It's bullying. There's laws against bullying now. It lowers a child's self-esteem. The American Psychological Association has shown that, it's proven that, but you don't have to be a psychologist to know that when you're being bullied. When somebody's making fun of you all the time because of what you look like, your race, color of your skin. And if you want to really look at it real broadly, that's the same thing Christopher Columbus did when he landed here, 1492 in Hispaniola. He bullied the natives in too. And now here it is, the same thing. We're still being bullied. Our children's being bullied. I'm being bullied by this name changing. We are not caricatures. We're not mascots. We're not cartoons. Humanize me. I'm a human just like you. And as a point of interest, Native Americans only been declared human for about 130 years anyways. And it took case law in 1880s. But Standing Bear versus Crook in Nebraska. They had to prove that we was person. Until then, we were just chattel. We was no more than a cow. So I want to remind you of the history of this, because it isn't just right now. There's a history of this, dating to Columbus, all the way here. The same issue then is the same issue now. Point of bullying, trying to discredit me, trying to identify me on your own terms. Dan Snyder trying to tell me I'm a mascot. I'm a human being just like you. My children deserve to be recognized as such, just like his does. In light of that, I want to offer a quick prayer. And I want to know what I'm praying. I want y'all to know what I'm praying for. I'm speaking my own language. I'm Choctaw from southeast Oklahoma. I want you to know that I'm praying that ask the Creator to look upon us as children. We're His children, all of us. Even Dan Snyder, I guess, maybe. We'll find that out later. But he is too. And while we're singing this song, while we're praying, I want you to pray with me when I'm praying. And I want you to also pray for each and every one of us. Pray for Ian. Pray for Josh for things that they do. Pray for each other. Pray for Dan Snyder too, because I know, our culture teaches us to pray for those we don't like. Pray for those who have done us wrong. And the reason we do that is it's kind of ease our own heart, because we don't want to walk around with anger and animosity. But also as a reminder that the Creator can do more for Dan Snyder than all of us can right here. We could have 1,000 of these protests, but the Creator can do more for him than we can. Shalom b'shor topama. Ishmiyok polacha. Ataki bayasha piyaha. Ishmiyok polacha. Tonkashla. We come to you today, Tonkashla. Look upon us today, Tonkashla, and see us, Tonkashla, trying to be recognized as a person, as a human that you meant us to be, that you gave to us. And it's not just about natives, it's about all humanity, Tonkashla. Everybody deserves to be recognized for what you have made them to be. Thank you for Ian, thank you for Josh for founding this, carrying it to this level, Tunkaxla. May they always do so until the name is changed, until it's recognized. And for the people that are here today, Tunkaxla, for the work they do all throughout the year, Tunkaxla, and pray for Dan Snyder, that you would guide him and touch his heart in a kind and a gentle way, Tunkaxla. He may see this, Tunkaxla. He may see the things that he does to your children, Tunkaxla. May we all have a safe journey home, Tunkaxla. May we all go in this, leave in a good way, Tunkaxla. We offer this smoke, Tunkaxla, that you would be here with us today, Tunkaxla. This is the way that you have given us to pray, Tunkaxla, in this way. How? Talk we all.
Thank you. Thank you. So good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to make some introductory remarks and then we have other speakers. Rebrand Washington Football. My name is Josh Silver. I'm a co-founder of Rebrand Washington Football. Rebrand Washington Football is a grassroots advocacy group formed to pressure for a name change. The name's a dictionary-defined racial slur. One of our major activities is gathering petitions at metro stations and farmers markets. This year, Rebrand Washington Football gathered 1,884 petition signatures. Thank you. Over a period of 5 years, we have gathered 9,024 petition signatures. And we're just beginning. We're going to exponentially increase this. Mr. Snyder wants you to think that his name and mascots honor Native Americans. Why is it then every time my high school deletes a Native American mascot, a Native American tribe is leading the change? This past summer, a school district in rural Idaho deleted the name Redskins in response to a tribe. 2,000 high schools have deleted racist mascots. 28 have deleted the name Redskins. This year, Maine enacted a law banning Native American mascots in public schools. Locally, the city of Alexandria joined the District of Columbia and Arlington County in asking Mr. Snyder to change the name of his team. And we hope that Montgomery County follows in 2020. Why do we insist on change? Today, Rebrand Washington Football is delivering a report to Mr. Snyder. The name of the report, show this for the camera. The name of the report is Native American Mascots Dishonor and Demean: The Psychological and Sociological Impacts of Racial Slurs as Mascots. Psychological research has found that Native American mascots have negative impacts on Native Americans and non-Native Americans, particularly school children. Focus groups conducted by the Department of Education have found that Native American mascots lead to bullying. In one case, a non-Native American kid called a Native American, you guessed it, a mascot. Native Americans are people, not mascots. Woo. Here's a quote from a Native American parent at the focus group. She says, "The use of derogatory and stereotypical caricatures used to falsely depict Native Americans hold an eerie resemblance to the caricature-like pictures of people with exaggerated facial features used in old Nazi propaganda newspapers, which were used to influence and incite negative public opinion and thus the dehumanization of Jewish people." I know what she is talking about. I am Jewish, and to me the mascot on a helmet is like putting a swastika on a helmet. It has to stop. Mr. Snyder owns a team, but he does not own Native American heritage or identity. Native Americans own their own personhood, and they have told Mr. Snyder, hands off. Racism and oppression is a national dilemma. The name of the DC team that plays in the nation's capital symbolizes our struggles as a nation. Mr. Snyder has a chance to be patriotic by recognizing the strength of diversity in our country and to respect Native Americans and to repent. Change the name. We are here on Pearl Harbor Day, and we entered World War II to fight genocide and racism. Today, we are fighting a symbol that stands for genocide and racism. And we're not alone. Tomorrow, there's going to be a protest when the Washington football team goes to play the Green Bay Packers. There's going to be a protest by our Native American allies and other allies in front of the stadium. Those are the remarks of Rebrand Washington football. We have a number of distinguished guests with us today. I am first going to introduce David Grasso, at-large council member, District of Columbia. He is the chairperson of the Committee on Education. He was first elected in 2012, and this year he led the charge to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Day in Washington, D.C. Can we have a round of applause for that? And I just wanted to say one more thing about David Grasso, because this shows the type of human being that David Grasso is. Before college, David Grasso volunteered helping Salvadorian refugees living in Honduras. Very timely issue today. He also spent a year as a full-time volunteer with the Brethren Volunteer Service building a transitional housing program for homeless women and children in San Antonio, Texas. I also worked with the homeless when I was in college, and I work with the homeless today. I just wanted to mention that to all the wonderful human beings that we have today. Councilmember Grasso, please come forward and make some remarks.
Thank you, Josh. Sure. Good morning, everyone. We're here again this year to continue to show that this name has got to change. And I think this movement continues to grow. On October 24th, I was in Minneapolis to join the protest when the Washington team played the Minnesota Vikings. There was over 1,000 people there that were continuing to make the charge that this name has got to change. So we keep up the fight. I appreciate the petitions, Josh, and Ian. I think it's just amazing that you guys continue to do this work, and hopefully this crowd will continue to grow. I think this is my 4th year or so coming out to join you, and I already have seen a number more people joining us on a regular basis, which is all it's going to take. We just have to keep up the fight every single day and recognize that this is a human rights question. This is a question about how we show respect for all human beings and not degrade people through a stupid moniker on the side of a helmet. And it's time for Snyder, it's time for the NFL to step up and do the right thing here and change the name, just like you mentioned across the country. High schools and other activities at colleges are changing their names when they're offensive. So, one person being offended by this name is enough. But we have an entire movement of people in this country and around the world that care about changing this name, and it would go a long ways towards healing in our country. So keep up the good work. I'll be here year after year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. I just wanted to mention before I introduce the next speaker is a couple of weeks ago there was an article in the Washington Post. The Washington football team's popularity is plummeting. Well, there's a number of reasons why this is so. But during the course of the article, there were 2 people that were interviewed, and it seemed like they spontaneously mentioned to the reporter the problem with the name, that they want a rebranding. And over the years, Rebrand Washington Football has collected more than 9,000 petitions, but that just represents a small number of people that we interact with. When we go to a metro station or a farmer's market over a course of 2 hours, we're interacting with thousands of people that pass us. So I think that over the course of 5 years, we have touched, hopefully, tens of thousands of people, and I hope we've played a role in people spontaneously saying, it's time for rebranding. And that's a perfect segue to my next speaker. He's a representative for the Center for Native American Youth. The Center for Native American Youth was started by former Senator Byron Dorgan to advocate for Native American youth. And today I am so pleased this young man has come from Chicago to be with us. His name is Anthony Tomas Pochel, and he spends time in Chicago advocating for a change of the name of the hockey team. I won't say the name of the hockey team because it is also a racial slur. And we know that there's some professional baseball teams as well that need a name change. Anthony began his involvement with the Center for Native American Youth in 2015, serving as a youth ambassador for President Obama's Generation Indigenous Initiative. In 2018, he was recognized by Center for American Youth as a champion for change for his initiative aimed at confronting misconceptions about Native peoples. We are so pleased to have you, Anthony. Please come forward and make some remarks.
Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Pochel Temez. I'm West Pacific First Nations Cree, Sichanga Lakota, as well as Black. I'm a 2018 Champion for Change for the Center for Native American Youth, the co-president of Chi Nations Youth Council, and the Midwest representative for United National Indian Tribal Youth. We're here today to appeal to Mr. Snyder to rebrand the Washington football team because of the negative impact it has on the Native American community. According to a report commissioned by the United Indian Nation, compiled by Michael A. Friedman, PhD, titled The Harmful Psychological Effects of the Washington Football Mascot, that regardless of intent and regardless of whether these stereotypical images are considered offensive, they have the effect of lowering self-esteem and mood among Native American adolescents and young adults, and of facilitating negative associations toward Native Americans by other racial groups. This, among many other reasons, is why we're here today delivering petitions signed by people who are tired of negative stereotypes of Native people in the year of 2019. Since I can remember, I've been combating negative stereotypes like race-based mascots and racial slurs by creating a positive image of Native people as culturally thriving modern-day communities and individuals with deep connections to our ancestral homelands, something that the Washington football team can never do. Rather, they are contributing to the discrimination against Native Americans across the nation by continuing to use a documented racial slur and beheaded character of a Native person to profit at the expense of our exploration. Before we leave here, we must all remember that Washington football team is not the only sports team guilty of negatively impacting Native communities. We have hundreds of schools across the nation that continue the use of race-based mascots and racial slurs to brand themselves, their sports teams, and make claims that this type of racism promotes a sense of pride. The NFL, MLB, and NHL should hold their teams to a higher standard and stop contributing to the violence against the First Peoples. It's time for change. It's time that we acknowledge that no other group of humans are portrayed through this type of degradation as much as Native Americans for profit by the professional sports teams. While I censored Native peoples, let us not label this as a Native issue because this is a human rights issue. And one thing that I would add is, with me being a mixed youth, with me being Black and Native, these mascots are just a barrier to my everyday living. Either one side of me gets erased because I don't look Native, I don't look like a mascot, or I'm constantly told that I'm not Native because of these mascots. And so it's a much larger issue than our community. Like I said, it's a human rights issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm proud to be here today with a number of incredibly wonderful local advocates, and we're going to hear from some of them right now. Mary Phillips is Omaha and Laguna. Mary, do you want to come and make some remarks?
Thanks, Josh, for having us come together today. Thank you for coming out and interest to do to capture what it is that we've been wanting to say, and that our voices have been there, but nobody's been listening. And most importantly, Dan Snyder hasn't been listening. This fight has been going on for decades and decades, and You know, it's 2019, and I think his time's running out. So unless he gets some wins, I think people are going to start listening, and hopefully today will be one of those days. So I just want to send some words to Dan Schneider and the HTTR Nation, whatever that means. But here we are today to stand up against the racist name and offensive mascot you have clung your dismal descent to loserdom to for what? To say Indians are there for us? For non-natives to take their culture, assuming their culture does not exist? So therefore we must take ownership of their offense and the trademark, and then to trademark their image? The masses have spoken of late, as we all know, and they have said two things. The first thing is polls made and paid for by corporations wanting a very clear result, regardless of the research means, is a discredit to the whole of the research community. Or bluntly, bad research equals bad data. Polls equal paid for polls equal disinformation. Two, the Washington Football, and more so Dan Schneider, are in exile from your own hometown. And guess what? We don't need a poll to tell us that. Especially when there are landscapes of empty seats on Football Sunday in DC. You can ask anyone, what color does Sunday mean around here? What color? Purple. As we have seen, there are more Ravens fans in DC now than there are DC fans. So as it is, the purpose for a new stadium has become clear and more clear with every loss, with every chant of sell the team, and every new hashtag, hashtag fire Bruce Allen, hashtag resign Dan Schneider. So these hashtags, these chants are sending even more clear message that the team is not wanted in DC. And it has always not been wanted in Native communities. So thank you again today for taking this time to let us share our culture. And the prayer today is so important, and hopes that it goes out to everyone who is listening and everyone who cares about Native Americans. We are still here. We are still people and not mascots. I hope.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. Wonderful. Our next speaker is Nick Courtney, Makah Tribal Citizen. Nick.
Thank you, everyone. Kukubasa Oxwell. Today's a good day. The last 3 years, I think we have seen snow, so it's nice to be out here with no snow. But it's great to be here, standing with relatives. Thank you for the press that are here. Thank you to Councilman Grosso for being here with your family. And thank you to the Rebrand Washington football team for their work day in and day out, collecting signatures, educating the public. And also thank you to representatives from the team for being here to hear us out and to accept our petitions. I know that we may not always see eye to eye, but we thank you for being here and send prayers that your hearts will change on this issue. Again, my name is Nicholas Courtney. I'm a member of the Makah Nation of Washington State, and I've been living in Washington, D.C. For 4 years now. I'm a previous middle and high school teacher as well. And coming from the great state of Washington and seeing how a football team can incorporate Native culture in a positive way that the Seattle Seahawks do with appropriate imagery and incorporating tribes in their day-to-day operations is something that I strive every team across the country to strive for. Indian mascots and stereotypes present a misleading image of Indian people and feed the historical myth that have been used to whitewash a history of oppression. Despite decades of work to eliminate the use of discrimination and derogatory images in America's sports, the practice has sadly not gone away. Specifically, rather than honoring Native peoples, these caricatures and stereotypes are harmful, perpetuate negative stereotypes of America's first people, and contribute to a disregard for the personhood of Native peoples. as stated earlier, and documented in comprehensive review of decades of social science research, derogatory Indian sports mascots have serious psychological, social, cultural consequences for Native Americans and non-natives, especially our youth. Of today's American Indian and Alaskan Native population, those under the age of 18 make up 32%, and Native youth under the age of 24 represent nearly half, or 42% of the entire Native population. These factors together indicate a very real need to take immediate action in a number of areas, including the removal of harmful images, as well as an education of the general public to diffuse additional hateful activity against Native peoples. Hundreds of tribal nations and regional tribal organizations, civil rights organizations, school boards, sports teams, sports and media personalities, and individuals have called for the end of these harmful Indian mascots, including the Washington football team's logo. The NFL's Washington football team name is a dictionary-defined racial slur. The slur's origin is rooted in government bounties announcements calling for the bloody scalps of Native Americans in the 1800s. From the early 1900s up until today, the term has been used to carry on as a racial slur in popular culture. For much of the 20th century, the term was used interchangeably in movies and books with the word savage to portray a misleading and denigrating image of Native Americans. The team name also gives assurance to the thousands of K-12 schools that use Native American and their imagery and mascots, and most importantly, speak for our Native youth before they have an opportunity to speak for themselves. So again, I thank you all for being here, for standing with us, and for allowing me to speak. And you know, I think that this is a very important issue. The National Congress of American Indians, which represents the 573 federally recognized tribes and numerous state recognized tribes, has passed resolution after resolution, along with other racial advocacy groups, to call for the end specifically of the Washington football team. That information can be found online, and I encourage you all to educate yourselves further on this important issue affecting our Native American peoples and our visibility here in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. So the next person I want to introduce is a co-founder of Rebrand Washington Football. And I got acquainted with Ian Washburn because one day I opened up the Washington Post and there was a front page article about Ian Washburn and his efforts. And through a bunch of connections, we hooked up with the Oneida Nation and we did a robocall to 10,000 Washington, D.C. residents. They picked up the phone and they heard why the name of the team's a dictionary-defined racial slur. And shortly thereafter, I said to Ian, you want to do a group? You want to form Rebrand Washington Football? And here we are 5 years later. We thought it was an opportunity for non-Native Americans to stand in solidarity with Native Americans and say that this racism must change. Ian, you want to come and make some remarks?
Thank you, Josh. And thank you, friends and allies, for coming out here today. I know it's cold. We greatly appreciate that. Every year you come back, and that is awesome. Because someday we're going to win this. The name's going to change. Harmful mascots are going to be replaced. They're going to be rebranded. As everyone knows, today is a significant day in American history. December 7th, 1941. 78 years ago today, my grandparents, Roger and Nancy Washburn, were in Griffith Stadium for the Washington football game against the Philadelphia Eagles. And during the game, the NFL games that afternoon, rumors began to fly about the attacks. Nobody had cell phones yet, nobody had handheld radios, so there was kind of a panic in the stands. I grew up hearing that story from my grandparents, and as I grew older, that story had increased meaning to me. And that's part of my Washington football fandom lore. I always thought that was pretty neat. And we were entering that day, the war to end all wars, supposedly, against genocide and racism. Well, here we are 78 years later, asking the Washington football team to change its name. My grandparents held that season ticket account all the way through the rest of their lives. My dad held on to it through the 80s, 90s, and I took over in the early 2000s. I closed out my season ticket account in 2016. I wrote a letter to Mr. Snyder in the ticket office explaining why I was going to have to discontinue the account. It made me sad to give up the season tickets after all those years, but I wasn't alone. As Mary said, you have acres of empty seats in that place now, and a lot of people are getting the message. The team popularity appears to be somewhat declining, so I think a lot of that has to do with mascots. What I have here in my hand is a book that was written a couple years ago by C. Richard King. I'm going to use the R word because the name of the book is Redskins, Insult, and Brand. King thoroughly documented the history of this team dating back to the earliest days in 1932-33 when George Preston Marshall founded the franchise. It is the most thorough documentation of the history of this team and its mascot I've ever read. And next to the late legendary team journalist Rich Tandler, who documented everything R words, this is the best book I've ever read. I advise anybody that wants to know more about the history of this team and the mascot specifically to check this book out. And I'm also going to give this to the team officials who have come out today. Thank you, Robert and Will, for coming out this morning. And hopefully they will give this to Mr. Snyder so he can know a little bit more about the history of his own team. So again, thank you all for coming out. We're going to continue at this for another year. We're going to continue gathering SIGs well through 2020, and we'll be back next year. Until the name changes, we're going to be back. So thank you all for coming out today.
Welcome. So the next speaker is another local activist who I've known since the 1980s. We go back a while, and we were active on a whole range of issues. And Bill Mosley one day was sitting in his house and he got a robocall. And Ian Washburn and Josh Silver are talking about the name of the team. And Bill gives me a call and says, I don't know you were doing that. Can I get involved? And I said, absolutely. So Bill Mosley, longtime DC resident, please come forward and make a couple of remarks.
Thank you, Josh. So I've been working with Josh and Ian on the petition campaign to change the name. And so often when we're doing it, people come to us and say, is this the most important issue you could be working on, changing the name of a football team? And well, I think, from what you've heard from some of the other speakers, we know the answer already. But what I like to tell them is this is part of a larger issue, one of the most important issues, perhaps the most important issue in our country at the time, which is the fight against racism. And when it becomes acceptable to demean and stereotype Native Americans, it becomes more normalized to demean minorities and other marginalized peoples across society. There was a time, a decade or so ago, when we could tell ourselves, or maybe kid ourselves, that we were making real progress against in the fight to eliminate racism in our society. But over the last 4 years, and that time frame is no accident, we've seen an emergence of more hate groups, white nationalist groups, and attacks against minorities, both physical, verbal, and online. And so I argue that we have to fight racism on all fronts, and wherever it exists, wherever it raises its head. And whether it be from Charleston to Charlottesville to the nation's capital. Racism is no joke, and we must fight to abolish it. And as long as this team is using an offensive, demeaning name and speaking and supposedly in our name representing our city, it is our right, I believe, and our obligation to tell Dan Snyder to change the name. Change the name. Let's hear it. Change the name.
Change the name.
Change the name. Thank you.
I think we should do a chat.
Yeah.
Change the name, change the logo, rebrand Washington football. A few times. Change the name, change the logo, rebrand Washington football. Change the name, change the logo, rebrand Washington football. All right. So we're going to have one more speaker, and then we're going to have the Uptown Boys, and then we're going to make a presentation to the team officials. The last speaker is also a local advocate who does wonderful activism. Peter Landeros, you want to come up and make a few remarks?
Hello everyone, my name is Peter Landeros. I'm a Pasquayaki Indian from Arizona. I'm here today as a representative of the American Indian movement. As long as this team's been around, there's been a fight against the name. AIM has been a part of that fight since the 60s, late 60s, and I'm proud to stand here today to still fight that fight. It was said earlier that on October 24th there was a AIM protest against the team in Minnesota. About 1,000 people showed up for that. In the past years in Minnesota, there's been other protests. One year there was 5,000 people that showed up. Another year in Arizona, there was so many of us that showed up, the football team couldn't even get into the stadium. This is what needs to happen here. We need to draw the numbers and have the strong showing so that this team understands that this name is not honoring us. The original origin of this word is drenched in bounties on Native American scalps. I'm going to explain to you what the article read in a colonial newspaper. Well, first let me explain to you how the French and the English originally introduced scalping to the United States. They took above the eyebrows, around the ears to the small of the neck, and then they pulled the scalp off of your head. This is the way they used to scalp us for the bounties. Men, women, children, and infants. And it stated in the article that the red-skinned, blood-soaked bodies are worthless. Leave them where they lie. That is not honoring us. That is disrespecting us in the most ignorant way possible as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a blood-soaked dead body. I'm a real person. I'm a human being. And all this is about is respect. Respect for us as human beings, and that we are more than what the Constitution of this country brands us to be. Understand that we are real people. I am a real human being. This is about respect, respect, respect. If the team really truly respected us as a nation of people, why aren't they supporting some of the worst reservations in the country? By help building homes, houses, by help fighting against the drug problems, fighting against the murdered and missing women. They don't do any of this. All they do is sit here in Washington, D.C. and say we honor them because of the name and the logo. BS. Understand, this is a fight that's been going on for a really, really long time. And I am offended every time I see it on the side of a truck, on a logo, anywhere. Living in this area, you might as well just post the N-word where you see that Washington logo. That's what it means to me and the people where I come from and the people I represent as part of the American Indian movement. I hope.
So Mr. Snyder wants to think that his team represents the Native American culture. That's fake news. We have here today real Native American culture, and we want to show you some of it. Uptown Boys, do you want to come forward and perform for us, please? Uptown Boys and Lady. And then we're going to present a few gifts to Mr. Snyder's representatives.
That's fine. You can hold back up.
Hi, my name again, Nicholas Courtney, Macaw Nation. This is Nick Renshaw, Mary Phillips, and we're the Uptown Boys, an intertribal drum group, and we're just sing a song. Thank you all again for being here.
Thank you. So now we're going to present some gifts and hopefully some things that will enlighten Mr. Snyder. I just want to hold this up. These are the petitions for this year. And it's about 2 inches thick. 1,184 petitions. And I want to show you, this is what petitions on a clipboard. This is actually what it looks like when people sign at a metro stop. In addition to the petitions, we have the book that Ian's going to present. And Peter, you have a gift as well you want to give to Mr. Snyder. Why don't you explain what you're going to give?
I'm going to offer them a gift of tobacco. Tobacco is a sacred herb to us as natives. At one point in time, it was also used as currency. And it's a sign of show of respect. I hold no animosity to these two gentlemen. What I hold animosity to is the name of the team and the refusal of the owner to change it. If I ever had a chance to meet Dan Snyder, I would be respectful and I would be polite because I am that type of person. And everybody deserves respect, including us. Even though he disrespects me every day by keeping this name alive, I will never disrespect that man because I am not going to lower myself to his standards in that aspect.
Thank you. So after we present these articles to Mr. Snyder, don't go away because we're going to take some pictures. I also forgot to mention we're presenting Mr. Snyder with a report as well as a letter.
Josh, one thing need to mention that we are on Piscataway lands.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Much respect to the Piscataway people. This is the land we are on today.
I want to remind everybody that this is Piscataway land. The gentleman I took over as the leader of American Indian movement was the Piscataway chief of Billy Tyak. They've been here since before colonialism, and they've led the fight when it comes to this in this area too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, let's take some pictures.
1, 2, 3. Change the name!
Everybody fist up in the air.
Fist up in the air. 1, 2, 3.
Change the name! Change the logo!
Change the logo!
Change the name!
Change the name!
Change the logo!
Change the logo!
Change the name!
Change the name!
Change the logo!
Change the logo! Rebrand Washington football!
Rebrand Washington football!
Rebrand Washington football!
Rebrand Washington football!
No name change, no stadium.
No name change, no stadium!
No name change, no stadium.
No name change! No stadium!
All right, what a
Great.
wonderful.